All right. We are picking up on these parables. We have two left in Matthew. And then we're going to be moving over to Luke for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So two left in Matthew, 10 in Mark, or yeah, 10 in Luke. Both of the ones tonight, our last one was the wedding feast, if you remember, 2 weeks ago. And both of them tonight are in chapter 25 of Matthew, I'm sorry. And the first one, this is a semi-famous one also, the parable of the 10 virgins. All right. And it runs verses 1 to 13 of chapter 25. And we're going to break it up and get into it here. So just setting it up in the very beginning, verse 1, then the kingdom of heaven will be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. All right. So we are going to talk about what this setup is here. So Matthew 24 ended with the parable, meaning to emphasize the idea of being ready for the coming of Jesus. That's how that ended up. And chapter 25 starts with another parable, exact same principle. All right, you'll see it pretty clearly. So it's a wedding, and you've got the 10 virgins who have to take their lamps out to meet the bridegroom. There was 3 phases to a Jewish wedding in that day, and still is today in the Orthodoxy. The first was an engagement. All right, sounds just like ours, right? Except that the fathers made the engagement. All right, this wasn't between girl and guy. The fathers set this up and said, "Hey, guess what? You two are getting married." The second part of the whole ceremony was the betrothal. All right, and this was just a ceremony where they weren't married yet, but they made mutual promises to each other. All right, that was a second thing, and then thirdly was the literal marriage, and the engagements after the betrothal. You waited 1 year. That's how it worked. You waited 1 year, and then you had an actual marriage ceremony. And you could think of the 10 virgins as the bridesmaids. All right, that's basically who they are. And in the tradition, the bridesmaids are attending the bride. When the bridegroom shows up for the wedding, all right, they would go out with their lamps and conduct him into the home. They would guide him into the home. That was their job. That was part of the, unique part of the ceremony that they had. One thing that's important, when you hear it was 10 virgins, that means nothing. It's not about their virginity. It's just their maids, their maidens. All right. What it's really about is what's coming up. Also, I learned that 10 of them means nothing. It could have been 5 or 15 or 20, but 10 in those days was a fairly common number of bridesmaids to have. All right. So Jesus just used a number that they all would have said, yeah, that sounds right. All right. When he's given this parable. So in this scenario, the first 2 stages have taken place. They've been engaged. They've had their betrothal ceremony. The year has passed, and we're coming up on the wedding. Now, who do you think the bridegroom represents?
It'll be Jesus.
It's going to be Jesus. And it's very warranted to say that. And let me tell you why. Just want to pull this up for you. It's Matthew 9:15. Jesus said, "How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. Then they will fast." All right. In the light of that, it's pretty obvious that Jesus is referring to himself as the bridegroom. You can make that connection here very simply. What's really interesting about that, and again, this goes to there's nobody in this group, but the people who believe Jesus is a created being and is not God. All right, this fits in because in the Old Testament, every time you see the word bridegroom talked about, it's talking about God. All right, not the Messiah. Bridegroom in the Old Testament, multiple places in Isaiah, Jeremiah. Hold on. My computer tried to reset. All right. Multiple places in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea. God refers to himself as the bridegroom. And who is the bride in the Old Testament? It's Israel. All right. Mm-hmm. So this is, again, in sort of a roundabout way, Jesus taking on the title of deity. Okay. And I think it's really important anytime we see that, because there are a large, believe it or not, there is a large contingent of Christians out there that believe Jesus is not God, that believe he's a separate created being. Um, so anytime I see connections in there, I like to point them out in case you run into it. This is another example where he is giving himself the title of God, even though it's in a roundabout way. All right. Now we're going to finish up the parable. It's verses 2 to 13. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept, and at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him." Then all the virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, lest there not be enough for us and you both, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." While they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." And he answered and said, "Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. All right. This was kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? All right. We all see the connection here. Some of the maids were prepared. They were ready for the coming. And Spurgeon pointed out that in this story, notice that when the bridegroom was delayed, they all went to sleep, right? It's not the foolish ones weren't foolish because they went to sleep. They were the wise ones went to sleep also. Where the foolish ones make their mistake. Their mistake was not being prepared. All right. That was the entire mistake that they made. Was not being prepared because they had a job to do here. And the worst part is this sort of ties into false believers also, because they appeared to outward eyes to be ready. They had their lamps, they're carrying them, they look good, right? They look like they should look like they're ready to do their job. But what we know is they were unprepared. They did not have enough oil to carry out the mission. And the point of this is, with the bridegroom being delayed, is there was an unexpected time in which the bridegroom arose, right? That's the whole issue. We all know this. I mean, we know that Jesus said in a couple places that no one knows when he's coming. None of us. Actually, while he was here on earth and in human form also, even God withheld even that information from him, from the Son. Um, so no one knows. And the entire point is, if you aren't prepared and he does show up, the penalty is severe, isn't it? I mean, taking it back to the parable, this was a big deal. Imagine, all right, let's imagine it today. Imagine bridesmaids missing a wedding. Can you imagine what a big deal that would be?
Mm.
All right.
Yeah.
Yep. Multiply it times 10 back then, because this was not just a social event, it was a responsibility. It was part of their cultural responsibility. And so the penalty would have been super severe in those days. They were locked out of the wedding, but we all understand what Jesus is saying here. All right. That you better be prepared because you don't know when I'm coming back.
Mhm.
And if I come back and you're not ready, the door is going to be shut. It's a harsh lesson. But the door is going to be shut. So the whole point of this parable, and it follows up on the wedding feast, is be ready. That's the entire point of the thing. Be ready. Don't just act like you're ready. Don't just present to others like you're ready. Literally, in your heart, in your life, be ready. And so that must have been an important parable because he back to back them, right? Chapter 24, wedding feast, to 25, right into this parable of the 10 virgins. So it's a very important point Jesus wanted us to get, that we've got to be prepared. All right. Are there any questions or comments on that one?
Nope.
All right. And then the last one, in Matthew, piggybacks right off this one. We're jumping right into it in verses 14 to 30. This is the parable of the talents. Hello, sir.
Welcome.
Can you hear us?
This is amazing.
Hey,
Oh.
can you throw a chat at him, Rick, just to see if he's
Mhm.
having?
What's his name? Melissa?
It's
Give me a minute. There he is. Hold on. I'll tell you.
Can you hear us, sir?
Okay.
Hope he's connecting.
Okay, you're fine.
So we're talking about the parables of Jesus, and we are in Matthew chapter 25 right now. And we're going to be doing verses 14 to 30. It's the parable of the talents. All right. So I'll be talking about it, but anytime anybody here has a question or a comment and something to add, we just jump in and say it. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Great. Thanks. All right. So the parable of the talents, we'll set it up with verses 14 and 15. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country. He called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another one. To each according to his own ability, and immediately he went on a journey. All right, so this is setting it up. This is another famous parable. We all know the generals of this. So this is not in the ancient world. This is not a strange situation. The indentured servants of the day would have been given great responsibility when the master had to leave. All right, they were given financial responsibility. They were given responsibility for taking care of the home they all lived in. And the smartest thing he could do with his money, because it's not like today where we have banks and we can wire it around and do all that. The smartest thing to do was to give it to people you trusted and hope that they would grow it in your absence. So that's exactly what he did. So when we're talking about talents here, it's a unit of money, obviously. Anybody know what it's worth? I had no clue either. And the interesting thing I found out today when studying on this was that it doesn't refer to a dollar amount, it refers to a weight. All right. So the value would be based on whatever material he gave them, a pound of gold, a pound of silver, a pound of, whatever the precious metal was. It was a unit of weight. But the one thing the one commentator said in those days that almost always it was at least the equivalent of $1,200 US or more. Okay, so and if $1,200 US today, let's go back 2,000 years, that's a lot of money. All right, they were given a lot of responsibility, and they were given different amount of money. And why were they given different amounts of money?
Depending on how they could use that money.
Correct, based on their ability. Right, the master said, I trust you with this, I trust you with that, and I trust you with that. All right, based on what I think. That could be how much experience you have, it could be your savvy, or whatever the man determined was the best bet. He broke it up based on their ability and what suited each person in the best way. So for some, 5 might be too many, or it might be just right. For some, 1 might be too many, or maybe 1's not enough because this person has more ability. You get the picture. All right, so he leaves immediately after giving the money to the servants. 16 to 18. Then he who received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5. And likewise, he received 2, gained 2 more also. But he who received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. All right, so key part of this passage here that Jesus is trying to get to us is that each of the people who got these talents from their master did as they saw fit. All right. This was their decision. He did not lay the ground rules. He didn't say you have to do this or have to do that. He said, I'm going to give to you what I think you can handle. And then it was completely up to them to decide what they wanted to do for it. Two of them took direct action. When it says went and traded, that implies that they immediately started putting that money to use, and trying to gain income. We don't know how they made it. We're not told that. They might have loaned it at an interest rate. They might have bought things and resold them. However they did it, they both got pretty good returns, right? 100% return across the board. The third servant, though, his mistake was not that he didn't protect the money, all right, because he certainly did. The other two protected it also, but they used it to invest and make more money. The problem with this gentleman is there was no direct action other than doing nothing. All right, that's what he did. Literally, he literally did nothing with the money. He took it straight to a hole, buried it. You know, you can understand that perhaps he was fearful that he would lose it. All right, maybe that was his issue. I can't think of any other reason you would do that, but maybe you're afraid I'm going to lose his money and he's going to be really angry when he gets back. But the important part to understand about this parable is that his actions were nothing. All right, that's what he was afraid of, or at least nothing positive. Let me put it that way. He did go out and dig a hole, so that's something, but he did nothing positive with the money. 19 to 23, the master's going to come home and he's going to judge the first two based on their actions. After a long time, the Lord of the servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 additional, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you gave to me 2 talents. I have gained 2 more talents besides. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you a ruler over many things. Enter in the joy of the Lord. All right. One of the things they pointed out was that the master, it says he was gone for a long time. All right. And that could have bred complacency. I hadn't considered this before, to where the long delay might have tempted the servants to think that they would never face or have to give an account for their management. But after a long delay, they absolutely did. All right. It might have been a long delay, but he still returned, and they still were required to give an account of how they spent the resources. And I think you all can see the connection. God doesn't give us 5 talents, but he gives us resources of one kind or another. They might be financial, they might be speaking, they might be serving. Whatever it might be. All right, we're given gifts, we're given abilities, we're actually given talents, if you will. And that is the whole point here. And when we're given these, we have to remember that it may be a long delay, but someday we're going to have to give account for how we managed, all right, the gifts that we were given by our master, by our Lord. And so these two, both of them, they both doubled it. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. That's a term we hear when you talk about entering where? Entering heaven, right? That's where we hear that most often. And certainly when it says enter into the joy of your Lord, that echoes the idea of heaven, doesn't it? And that's what he's saying. You did a great job. While you were here, I gave you certain gifts, talents, and abilities, and you multiplied them. You did a good, it reminds me of Paul. I've finished the fight. I've kept the race. I finished the race. It reminds me of that idea of the good and faithful servant entering into the joy of the Lord. And the important thing is the idea of that last line is that the master or God himself, there is a place of joy that belongs to him that we are going to be welcome in if we handle the resources that he gives us correctly. All right, and then we've got this poor third guy. All right, the one who did nothing with what he was given. That's 24 to 25, or Yeah, 24 and 25. Then he who received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed, and I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. All right. So his motive does come out here. It's what we mentioned earlier. He was afraid. And the other thing the commentators pointed out is we have to remember that these 3 were judged individually, not as a group. All right. It's not like God's going to come and judge at Judgment Day. He's going to judge West End Baptist Chapel as a whole. Okay. It's going to be an individual judgment. It's going to be a perfectly just judgment because our God is a perfectly just God. But it is going to be individual because if it was collective, they did pretty well. If it was collective, they had 8 talents and they returned 15. That's pretty good. All right. But that's not what he did. Right. He judged them individually. So the servant who buried his talent, he tried to excuse his behavior and why he did what he did because he was afraid of his master's great power. All right. He recognized the master had great power. And there's this implication that he believed his master to be in some sense omnipotent, where he says, you reaped where you haven't sown and you gathered where you didn't scatter seed. And the weird thing about this is he seems to be proud of himself. He says, look, there you have what is yours, right? In other words, he's kind of saying, you're so powerful, you don't really need my help. All right. All you needed me to do was take care of me. And that's what I did. I took care of me. I didn't worry about Bob down the street. I didn't worry about anybody in this country or that country. I took care of me. And now I'm giving you back what you gave me that I've done nothing with. All right. And that's the problem that he's going to face here. He's going to be condemned here. And that's why, because he was given, although it was smaller gift than the others got, the master chose correctly, didn't he? When he's basing it on ability, look what this guy did. Thank goodness he gave him the 1 and not the 5, or he'd be out 5 talents right now. So it's kind of almost comes about like he's proud that he didn't do anything and just returned to the master what was his, and it basically was a big excuse. You're so powerful, you don't really need me. I took care of this. Here, you can have it back. All right. The response in 28 to 30.
Bill,
Yes.
before you go there, I see this as salvation. When you're saved, our commission is to go out and we have that talent, we have that zest to, we just got saved. And if you don't tell anybody about it and you keep that to yourself, what you experienced, the first thing you're supposed to do is to go out there and spread the gospel. So you're not doing it. And when I see like the servant that failed, that's the pastor that has the church of 3 people in the congregation forever.
Yeah.
It never grew. And the master, God, gave him what he could handle. So he knew he wasn't going to do any more with it. You're going to have a member of 3. But those that took those blessings that they had, and we're thinking of talents as gold or something valuable. Don't you think God's people are the most valuable thing to God? That's where the wealth is. That's the true talent. So
That
what
is
I'm
true.
thinking out of this is you could do good things. It could be that you make a great deal of money, but you'll continue to get blessed if you do good things with that money. But if you're only going to use that money to take care of yourself, then you may not be blessed with more money to help other people. So that's what I'm pulling out of this as well, but especially on the church, that if you can't handle 50 in your congregation, then why would I entrust 250 with you?
Exactly. Yeah, 100% agree. In fact, some of the commentators thought that the talents that were returned represented saved people. The fact that, they went out and took the gifts God gave them to preach or to look, we're not all going to be preachers. We're not all going to be missionaries. But we all have talents that can be used in spreading the gospel for sure. It may be dropping an offering in the offering, and that helps the missionaries. It may be speaking at a public event, might be going door to door to invite people to the church. Or like John from our church does, it might just be picking people up on a bus. All that stuff matters. And Rick's 100% right. If you don't do anything with your gifts, then God's going to make sure you don't get any more than you can handle, and you're stuck with the 3-person church. If you're that pastor, I 100% agree with that.
You've got to scatter that seed on the land that had never had seed before.
Right.
You got to hit every country. You have to hit all ends of the earth, or he's never coming back until we do that. That's what we're commissioned to do.
Yep.
You've got to tell everybody. Everybody needs to know.
That's our main commission, and we do have that. I use this a lot. You all that listen to me know this, but that part in Revelation where it says that God will not return until the grapes are bursting. In other words, everyone is going to have a chance to hear it, and all of us in this room hold a unique responsibility. Wherever we are, we could be in Pennsylvania like I am, in West Virginia, we could be in Kenya. We all have a responsibility to spread the word. And I think that's exactly what this is about. And look, it's not just that if you don't do anything with your talent, that God's just disappointed in you. Let's read verses 28 to 30. But the Lord answered and said to him, "You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." All right, so this is very harsh condemnation. This isn't just can't believe you did that, right? This is harsh condemnation of the third servant. Wicked and lazy, all right? It was a condemnation of being wicked and lazy. And here we see sort of the point of what we're supposed to do. It follows right up with what Rick said. There are places that have not been sown. There are places where the seed has not been scattered. And that's what we're supposed to do. All right. And he's saying, you didn't do it. It'd have been better if you had deposited that coin with the banker. Let's put it this way. It'd be better if you just stepped aside and let somebody else do it. Because at least maybe I would have gotten a return on that. But as it is, you hid the talent. It's not just that you didn't use it. You hid it away that nobody could see it. And it did less than nothing for me. Really is what he's saying. So he could have done something with it. Jesus frames his interest. I would frame it as that if you put it in money terms, that money could have been given to someone who would have gone out and scattered seed and sown the ground that hadn't been scattered and sown. Then he makes this, he talks about this, for to everyone who has, more will be given, but from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. All right. That sounds rough if you read it out of context, right? If you read that out of context, it sounds kind of mean and nasty. But what he's saying is, if you have some stuff, 1 talent, say, and you don't do anything with it, then he's going to take even that from you because you're not helping spread the gospel. You're not helping with the mission God has in mind. All right. So he's not even going to let you hang on to that talent. All right. He's going to take it and he's going to give that talent or that gift to somebody who will do something with it. The people who are faithful with their talents, with their gifts, with their resources, they're going to be given more because God knows when they get more will be accomplished. If you get more, wicked and lazy servant, you'll probably just bury it and do nothing with it. So not only am I not going to give you more, but I'm going to take away what you have because it's useless to me. All right. So do you have any questions or comments on that one?
And you did cover where it said where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, that again has a heaven hell sort of feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah, you get to spend eternity in hell.
Yep.
That's what the weeping and the gnashing of teeth means. And I know it's mentioned in Luke, it's mentioned in Revelation and in Matthew. And you're worthless. How I'm taking this is I gave you the opportunity for salvation. That was a talent. I gave you that. You did nothing with the salvation that I offered you. You didn't
Yep.
do it. I did not know who you are. I'm closing the door, just like with the brides. The ceremony started. You're out. I do not know who you are. Hell is where you will spend eternity.
Yep.
Don't want to
And
be,
go ahead.
I'm saying I don't want to be there.
Yeah. And you know, we actually just a few weeks ago, we studied hell. Then we studied heaven, we studied hell. And it's not just that we don't want to be there. We don't want anybody to be there. Nobody in this world, our worst enemies, we would not wish that eternal condemnation on. And one other thing I think that if you want to take the larger context of Matthew 25 here, these parables all together, if you look at them all in context, there is the idea that our readiness for Jesus's return, all right, which they talked about in the last two parables before we got to this one, that readiness a lot of times is determined by the stewardship of the gifts and the resources that he has given us while we're here on earth. You can connect those in the greater context. So while we're here on earth, we need to use those gifts, and that action will help us be ready for that unknown time when he returns. We won't be the five bridesmaids who forgot the oil. All right, that's part of this, part of the whole scenario. It's a Matthew 25 really comes together. The end of 24 and 25 really come together with this broad message that you have to be ready. And here's a way you can be ready. I'm going to give you resources, and you need to use them. You could even say you need to use them to enlighten the five bridesmaids who weren't ready. All right, that'd have been nice, right? If we could have enlightened them, used our resources so they would have been ready and not been shut out of the wedding, or shut out of heaven, as we all know that that's what it means. Where are we at? All right. So that is it. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's 15 in Matthew, 15 of Jesus's parables in Matthew. And so we are going to be moving on. The next 10 are only mentioned in Luke. There's no mention of them in Matthew, Mark, or John. All right. They're exclusively to Luke's account. And this first one, it's probably the only one we'll get done today. It's Luke chapter 10. And it's verses 29, or I'm going to start at 25 to 37. I don't know if you ever heard of this one. It's called the Parable of the Good Samaritan. Does that sound familiar? Anybody? Yeah, this is a famous one. All right, this is not to say, you know, really in our churches, all of these parables should be famous. They really should, because let's not kid ourselves. Jesus spoke these parables back then for a very specific reason. It meant something to those people here, but they were recorded and placed in our Bibles because they mean something to us today. So it's crucial. They should all be famous. We're trying to make the parables famous, at least 25 of them. All right, among us, we're going to make them famous. But this is a one that everybody knows. So we'll go over it. It technically starts at verse 27, but I'm going to back up to where the very beginning is with the lawyer asking the question. So we're going to start verse 25, and I'm going to go through about 29 in this first section. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Okay. Now, first of all, lawyer, this is not a lawyer like we think of today. All right. This would have been an expert probably in Jewish Mosaic, Moses law, and rabbinic law. All right, that would have been his job. He would have been an absolute expert, and he asked this question, which of Jesus, it says he was testing him, and he asked this question of Jesus, to which he obviously already knew the answer. Right, as a lawyer of Mosaic and rabbinical writings. He already knew the answer, so he was trying to test Jesus out a little bit here. All right. And he asked the question, and Jesus sort of tosses it back to him, doesn't he? He says, well, you're a lawyer, right? What do you think it says? How do you interpret it? All right. What do you think's right? And the answer from the gentleman was pretty simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. All right. So the lawyer knew the answer. All right. It was a rhetorical question in the first place. But he was right. He knew the essence of the law. The essence of Mosaic and rabbinical law was exactly what he said. And if you did this, you will live. All right. That's sense of eternal life. And Jesus says, well, yeah, you're right. All right. That's all you have to do. If you do that, you'll live. But the gentleman did not like that answer totally. All right. Again, he wanted to justify himself. I think he wanted to get into a discussion, into an argument, or at least a debate, let's say. And he asked the question, who is my neighbor? All right. So he sort of measured himself against both commands, and he figured he had the first ones covered. He loved the Lord his God, right? All his heart, soul, and mind. He was very comfortable with saying, yep, I can do that. And that's probably a really big mistake on his part. All right, because it is a little prideful to assume that you truly love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. All right, that's not as simple as it sounds, is it? There's a little bit of pride there because you can get distracted in any one of those areas in your daily living. All right, your mind might be on him, but your heart's off. Your soul might be with him, but your mind's off. All right. Or they may all be off on a bad day. All right. So it's a little bit narcissistic to think that you have got the first command set, that I absolutely love him with everything that I've got. His second mistake was thinking that he could fulfill that commandment to love God without the second part, without the love of your neighbor part. Those are not separate issues. They're all tied together, right? That was his second mistake. And then his third mistake is he wanted to narrowly define neighbor. How do we know that? Well, number one, you could tell in the question, all right? Because when you get the answer, which we all know what Jesus says here, there is no, this is your neighbor and this is not, is there? There is no separation. And yet he's trying to get a definition of who is my neighbor, right? Because we know he's not talking about next door neighbors. None of us live close together, but we're all in God's family. We are all neighbors. So he wanted to narrowly define it because one of the other problems in this time with Mosaic, specifically rabbinical law, was it was considered by a lot of them, a lot of the religious leaders, that your duty before God was to love him and hate your enemy, to hate the person who didn't love God. Hence the great disregard and great disgust with the Gentiles, right? The Jews of that day had a real problem with the Gentiles. And they were actually taught that it was a good thing to hate them. In fact, we're going to talk about the Samaritan, but one of the rules they had back then was if you found a Samaritan woman in having difficulty in labor, if you were Jewish, you were not to help her because all you were doing was bringing one more of the worst kind of Gentile into the world. All right. That was sort of their belief. So you almost get the sense that this lawyer was trying to sort of pin Jesus down on giving an answer that went against traditional Judaic Judaism at that time, the Orthodoxy Judaism of that time. Almost like, I believe what you're saying, Jesus, but it really depends on who you say my neighbor is or isn't. All right, and there's the problem he makes. So this is where the parable comes in, because Jesus is going to give him the example. He's going to define neighbor with an illustration here, verses 30 to 35. Then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, poured on oil and wine, set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you. All right? So this certain man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho would have been a Jew. All right, that was the point Jesus was making. He picked a very famous road, the road to Jerusalem to Jericho. If he said there was a robbery on that road, nobody'd be surprised. All right, it was rather standard. So especially, I've often talked about the ancient Jewish historian Josephus. He actually mentions this road in his book in the Antiquities. He mentions the road specifically for how dangerous it is if you walk down it, and you will be robbed, basically. So the funny thing is here, one of the commentators pointed out that what made this story effective was most people would have thought that this man sort of deserved what he got. Because if you live in Jerusalem and you're going to Jericho on that road at night, you know what you're walking into. All right, it's not a surprise. So he almost sort of deserved it. But he gives 2 examples, a priest and a Levite. Notice he gives these examples, and both of them are categories of Jewish religious officials of the day. You had your priests, then you had your Levites from the tribe of Levi, and they saw their Jewish brother laying in this terrible condition by the side of the road, but neither of them did anything. In fact, they did even worse than nothing, right? They actually stepped across the other side of the road. It's not just that they passed him by with a cursory glance. They wanted no responsibility whatsoever. Jesus doesn't tell us why they crossed the road, but from the time period, you could sort of guess. If the guy dies, the Levite would have said, I'm not supposed to be touching his body. If the priest could say, I'm on my way to preach or in the synagogue, and what if I get blood on my clothes? Right? I'm all dressed up, I'm ready to go. What if I get blood on my clothes? Somebody else will come along and help this guy. You can almost see them saying that. One of the commentators put out a whole big list of what they could have been. Maybe he's a decoy, and if I help him, somebody's going to jump me. Or the famous one we do sometimes. Let's admit it, we all do it. I'm not really going to help, but I will pray for him. Right? I'll pray for him. That's what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to get dirty today. I am guilty of that. I have done that before. And I thought I'm such a fine Christian for going home and praying instead of driving to help somebody the way they needed it. That one kind of smacked me upside the face because I've done that before. Or, yeah, I probably could have gone and helped myself, but I'll just pray for him. It'll be fine. And look how great of a Christian I am, right? Whatever the reason, they were simply excuses not to help. And Spurgeon put it in his Richard, we love Charles Spurgeon here because he had sort of a comedic commentary. He's always spot on. And he said, I never knew a man refusing to help the poor who failed to give at least one admirable excuse, right? So one good admirable excuse for not helping. Now, when the lawyer and the followers heard about the priest and the Levite, they probably expected Jesus to say, and I think this is pretty accurate, that yeah, they didn't help, but a common, normal Jewish man came along and helped this poor soul out when the religious leaders didn't, because Jesus had no problem with jumping on the religious leaders of the day. But I'm going to tell you, I think the last thing they expected to hear was a Samaritan came. All right, that's probably the last thing they expected Jesus to say, because as I said, traditionally and generally speaking, the Jews of that day and the Samaritans of that day, it's not just that they didn't get along, it's that they despised each other greatly. And the cultures between those two would have given good excuse for the Samaritan to walk right on past the poor Jewish man also. All right. He would have had the best excuse of the three. All right. Why would I help this guy who I know hates me? That's much better than I might get blood on my clothes. Right. He had an excuse, technically. So, and especially when you talk about Samaritans, Jesus literally used the worst Gentile that existed in the minds of Jews that day, in those days. All right, there was Gentiles everywhere, but the Samaritans were the extra Gentile of the Gentiles. All right, so he not only used him as the example, but he shows that he loved and helped this man sacrificially. He didn't just go over to check on him. He didn't roll him over and see if you're okay. He did all that, and he gave freely not only of his time, but of his resources. All right, bandaged him up. He put him on his own horse. He took him to the inn. He took care of him for a night. And then when he left, he gave 2 denarii, which, where was that? They said 2 denarii would provide for the man's needs in the inn for 3 weeks. All right, so he gave that guy 3 weeks to heal, being taken care of. And then he said, on top of that, if it takes longer for him to be right, I will come back. When I come back through here, I will pay you the difference that it took. So look, it's not just that he helped. He did multiple things. They said that one of the commentators did the comparison between the Samaritan and Jesus, the Samaritan in this parable and Jesus. They said the Samaritan was an outsider, despised by the Jews of the day. That sounds a lot like Jesus, doesn't it? The Samaritan came after others failed to meet the need, and he came before it was too late, before the man had died, right? He came in time to save him. He came in with everything that was necessary to save this man, everything that this man needed. He gave really tender, loving care and provided for his future needs. So there's a comparison there to Jesus' life here on earth, and especially during the 3 years of his ministry, he faced a lot of the same things and did a lot of the same things. And then verse 36 and 37, he's actually going to apply the parable to this lawyer. He said, to which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, the lawyer, he who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Look, I know Jesus is God, which is why he's so good at pulling people in and then destroying their arguments. And I don't mean that in a destructive way. I mean that he uses understandable stories to explain complex things to regular old humans like you and me. And like this lawyer and everybody who was fortunate enough to be standing in that crowd and hear this parable. So according to the thinking of the day, and according to the thinking of this Jewish lawyer, the good neighbors, what he would have considered the good neighbors, that was the priest and the Levite, right? That's who he would have considered the neighbor. But they did not act like neighbors at all, did they? The way we would think of a good neighbor. And he admits, he truly and freely, because Jesus sort of traps him here, he truly and freely admits that he knew who the true neighbor was. Now, note something interesting here. He did not say it was the Samaritan. He probably couldn't even bring himself to say that. He just said, it's the guy that helped, right? He's the true neighbor, the one that helped out. He's the one who showed mercy on him. And again, the way he was phrasing the question to Jesus in the beginning, all right, I don't think he expected this outcome, all right, because he's asking Jesus to clearly delineate who the neighbors are that we're supposed to love like ourselves. All right. And Jesus just twisted his worldview upside down, didn't he? All right. And forced him to logically admit the point and concede the point that in the eyes of God, in the eyes of Jesus, our enemies are our neighbors. It is not, look, what kind of story would this be if we were instructed to love our family and friends? All right. Is that difficult? That's not difficult, right? The difficult part of love your neighbor is when it's somebody you don't want to love for whatever reason. I often say this about free speech. Free speech in the United States is a big deal. And the reason we have the law is because nobody cares if you say, I love puppies, right? Nobody's going to disagree with that, right? Free speech is when you are able to say the hard things and the tough things that people may not agree with. And that's exactly what Jesus did to him here. Jesus said, the person you consider your neighbor, those two, they didn't do anything for this man. The one that you would least want to be neighbors with, the one that you would least want to love and treat as you want yourself to be treated, is the man who actually was the true neighbor. And when the lawyer admitted it, and again, he was trapped in a logical, he was trapped in the logical conclusion that he could not get away from. Because of how skillfully Jesus, and he is God, so the skill comes with that, I guess. He had to admit it, and Jesus just made this last statement that was really powerful, I think. He's just go and do likewise. You go and be the Samaritan. Probably hard for him to hear, but that's what Jesus was saying. You go and be the Samaritan. You go and love the people that you least want to love. All right, because that is how you are showing me that you have God in you. That's how you're showing me that you get what is necessary to enter into the kingdom for eternal life, is what he's saying. You can translate that, to not just loving people that you don't want to love, but doing things we don't want to do. I think we could say the same thing. There are things for God's kingdom that need to be done that very often we really, really don't want to do. There are people who need our attention and need our love that we really, really don't want to attend to and don't want to love. And I think, and I hope that I remember this the next time a situation like this pops up. Now, one last thing I'll say about this, because I think it's important. That does not mean that we need to feel the requirement to run after every need that presents itself. All right, because that's an impossible task. One of the commentators said, notice that the Samaritan helped this man, but he didn't go build a hospital for unfortunate travelers. Okay, he did what he could do, and he made an impact on one man. But in God's eyes, that was the neighborly, loving, godlike thing to do. So as McLaren put it, I'll finish with what he said. He said, the world would be a changed place if every Christian attended to the sorrows that are plain before them. In other words, we don't even have to go looking for it. We all know who's struggling, who needs us, what needs to be done. If we just took care of what's right in front of us and obvious to us, the world would be a much better place. And I think he has a really good point there that flows along with this parable. So, all right, well, that was kind of like perfect timing. And we're going to pick up next week with the rich fool. The rich fool. All right, are there any questions and comments? All right, once again, I want to really thank Richard for joining us. We really enjoyed having you, sir.
Even I've enjoyed. Thank you so much.
Great, wonderful. I hope to see you again, and thank you for staying up till 2 a.m. for us. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Rick, would you mind?
Together in the comfort of our homes, and then be able to be right beside each other with that technology. And as we come to you tonight, we just pray that we would see things the way you see them, just like the Good Samaritan, and that we would accept that challenge and have the mindset that the Good Samaritan had, and just help those that have needs. And if we could just help with some of their specific needs, it truly would make the world a better place. We pray especially for Bill as he travels into Missouri, and just commend him for the amount of service that him and his family have given to CEF, and the 40 years that he's given there. Pray for Garrett and Sarah that they would find suitable transportation that would help them with their need now. And we just, pray for Israel, and not only for Israel, but we pray for every country that's involved, all the killing and the hate that's taken place. If we're going to abide by what we learned tonight, we need to love everyone and hope that we have peace, and that they can settle their differences and just do things that would be right in your eyes. And we just ask this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
All right. We'll
Thank
see you all
you.
next week. Thank you, Richard.
Richard, it
Thank
was
you, Richard.
wonderful
Hope
to
to
have
see you
you
next-
tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to find you on Facebook and hook up.
Thank you.
All right. Good night,
All right.
everyone.
Good night.